Instead of wattle and daub, some peasants in areas like Devon and Cornwall used cob, a building material made from clay-rich soil, straw and water. It was durable and insulating. Cob structures, once dried, could last for centuries with regular maintenance. Peasants mixed it with their feet, stomping it for hours to get the right consistency before packing it into wooden moulds or forming walls by hand. Not all peasant homes had straw thatch. In marshy areas, roofs were constructed using reed mats, tightly bound and overlapped to shed water. These mats were surprisingly long-lasting and more fire-resistant than dry straw. Maintenance was still required every few years, especially in damp climates. While dirt floors were common, some villages along coastal regions reinforced their floors with crushed oyster or mussel shells. This created a firmer surface and added calcium, which deterred some pests. In winter, woven mats of dried reeds or wool scraps were placed for comfort and warmth. Instead of strewing herbs solely to cover odours, peasants would burn bundles of dried lavender, thyme or tansy. This smoke masked smells, repelled flies, and was believed to ward off illness. Some even suspended herbs from the rafters to act as natural air purifiers. Many medieval peasants baked their bread directly in the hearth using hot ashes. They would shape coarse loaves from barley or rye flour, then bury them in the embers of the central fire. This method produced dense, smoky-flavoured bread with a hardened crust, sometimes still dusted with ash when served. Though far from today's bakery standards, it was an essential survival technique that didn't require special equipment, and it allowed families to make their own food using the same fire that heated their home. Lime wash remained popular, but some mixed it with cow dung for better adherence and mildew resistance. This created a surprisingly effective protective coating that helped preserve walls from rain and rot while keeping insects at bay. Before chimneys were common, many homes had turf vents built into their roofs. These small, controllable openings allowed some smoke to escape while retaining heat. Others built small sidewall hatches that could be opened during cooking hours to allow limited ventilation. Timber theft from noble lands was common, and whole villages might face punishment if a forest was stripped without permission. Some communities developed secret agreements to rotate wood collection from less patrolled areas. Disputes could lead to fines, floggings, or the confiscation of tools. When a villager needed a new barn or longhouse, others would help build it in exchange for a small feast, a tradition known as a building bee. These events built community trust and were often accompanied by local songs, roasted turnips and shared ale. Peasants used simple tools passed down through generations. Adzes shaped beams, wooden mallets drove stakes, and iron nails were carefully forged by hand. For levelling floors or cutting posts, they used plumb lines, rough chisels, and axes honed with sandstone. In medieval times, personal hygiene wasn't what we'd expect today. Bathing was rare for many commoners, partly due to limited access to clean water and the belief that water could carry disease into the body. Soap was handmade from animal fats and ashes and considered a luxury item. Wealthier households might bathe once a week, but for peasants it was often only a few times a year. Despite popular myths, people did try to stay clean using cloths and herbs, but body odour was a part of daily life. While we might picture fluffy loaves of golden bread, most medieval bread was far from appetising. Wheat was expensive, so commoners baked with rye, barley, or oats. In lean times, bakers even added crushed tree bark or ground beans to stretch their flour. This sometimes caused digestive issues or even poisoning. Nobles, by contrast, enjoyed fine white bread called manchette, baked from pure wheat flour and often served with honey or butter. Salt was more than a seasoning in the Middle Ages. It was wealth. Known as white gold, salt preserved meat and fish, making it crucial for survival, especially in winter. At grand feasts where a person sat in relation to the salt cellar marked their rank. nobles and honoured guests sat above the salt, closer to the host, while servants and lower status individuals were seated below the salt. Its value was so great that Roman soldiers were once paid in salt, giving us the word salary. Medieval evenings were dark, literally. Most homes didn't have windows, and when the sun went down, people relied on candles or oil lamps for light. But candles weren't the scented luxury we know today. They were often made from tallow, a rendered animal fat, which produced thick smoke and a strong odour. Only churches and the very wealthy used beeswax candles, which burned cleaner and brighter. For many, bedtime came shortly after sundown to save on lighting. While cats and dogs were kept for companionship or pest control, medieval households, especially noble ones, sometimes had more exotic pets. Falcons were prized by the upper class, not only for hunting but also as a symbol of status. Monkeys, squirrels, and even songbirds like nightingales could be found in wealthier homes. These animals were often pampered and even featured in medieval art and literature. Meanwhile, in rural communities, animals like goats and pigs sometimes served dual roles: livestock by day, companions by necessity. The bond between people and their animals, whether practical or affectionate, played a quiet but meaningful role in medieval daily life. A single night's sleep wasn't the norm in the Middle Ages. Historical records suggest that people followed a segmented sleep pattern: first sleep and second sleep. After going to bed at dusk, people would sleep for a few hours, wake around midnight, pray, read, or even visit neighbours, and then go back to sleep until dawn. This pattern matched the natural rhythms of candlelit life and limited daylight. It also allowed people quiet time for reflection in the middle of the night. In medieval times, oral hygiene was quite different from today. People often used herbs like parsley, mint, and rosemary to freshen their breath after meals. Chewing these fragrant herbs helped mask the strong odours caused by less frequent toothbrushing and the heavy diets of the time. Some even made homemade mouthwashes using vinegar or wine infused with herbs. While they lacked modern dental care, these natural remedies were an important part of daily life to maintain some sense of cleanliness and social etiquette. Medieval people did take some care of their teeth. While toothbrushes didn't exist, people used frayed sticks or cloth to rub their teeth clean and remove debris. Interestingly, skeletal remains from the period show relatively healthy teeth, likely due to a lack of processed sugar. Names in the medieval world carried deep meaning. They often reflected a person's trade, like John Smith, location, Alice of York, or a personal trait, Geoffrey the Bold. Nicknames were widely used, especially when multiple people shared the same first name. A Thomas could become Thomas the Miller, Tom Short, or Tomkin. Some surnames stuck for generations, becoming the last names we still use today. While peasants struggled to get enough food, noble banquets were lavish and long-lasting. Feasts were held to celebrate religious holidays, marriages, and military victories, and they didn't end after one course or one evening. Some lasted several days, featuring dozens of dishes, musicians, jugglers, and entertainers. Moulded jellies were served alongside dramatic centerpieces, like pies filled with live birds. These grand spectacles reinforced the wealth and status of the host. Welcome to the chaos and charm of the Middle Ages. We will explore the myths, monsters, and mysteries from medieval times. These legends shaped real beliefs, inspired crusades, and defined times. While the sword in the stone tale might sound far-fetched, many historians believe the legend was inspired by an actual war leader from the 5th or 6th century. This mysterious figure supposedly led British forces against Saxon invaders, laying the foundation for centuries of Arthurian legends. To medieval minds, dragons weren't just fantasy, they were facts. Bestiaries and maps marked unexplored lands with warnings like "Here be dragons." Caves, mountain ranges, and distant islands were all fair game for dragon sightings. Elves, goblins, and fairies were not the magical helpers we think of today. Back then, they were blamed for stolen children, sudden sickness, or strange happenings in the woods. Folklore was filled with warnings of these dangerous beings. The Holy Grail wasn't just a symbol of divine power, it was the ultimate medieval obsession. Knights of the Round Table, including Sir Galahad and Sir Lancelot, were said to seek this mystical chalice, believed to hold the blood of Christ. The search became a metaphor for purity, sacrifice, and divine favour. Medieval people truly believed in revenants, restless spirits or walking corpses. Ghost stories were not just spooky tales, but moral warnings about unresolved sins, improper burials, or divine punishment. Unicorns, manticores, and even the dreaded basilisk appeared in real medieval texts. Scholars of the time included them in encyclopedias, treating them as exotic animals rather than mythical monsters. These travelling performers kept legends alive, spinning tales of heroism, betrayal, magic, and war. Their stories were entertainment, history, and moral lesson all rolled into one. Merlin wasn't just a magician in stories. Some medieval people believed he had actually existed and possessed prophetic powers. Chronicles and religious texts sometimes referred to him as a sage who foresaw great wars and the rise of kings. The tale of Beowulf slaying Grendel and a fire-breathing dragon is one of the earliest surviving epic poems in English. While clearly legendary, it also reflects the real warrior culture of early medieval Scandinavia and England. A solar eclipse wasn't just a natural event, it was a warning. Medieval people believed celestial signs were divine messages. Comets could signal the death of a king. Blood moons foretold war. The sky was, quite literally, the news. The medieval world wasn't just built on stone and steel, it was built on stories. Legends weren't just entertainment, they were how people explained the unexplainable. Which legend do you believe has some truth to it? Contrary to popular myth, most educated people in the Middle Ages knew the Earth was round. This idea that everyone thought the Earth was flat actually comes from much later misconceptions. Medieval scholars, especially those influenced by ancient Greek and Roman texts, accepted a spherical Earth as common knowledge. One of the most enduring myths is that Vikings wore horned helmets. In reality, there's no evidence that these helmets were ever used in battle. The image likely comes from 19th century opera costumes and artistic imagination, rather than archaeological fact. It's often said people in the Middle Ages were filthy and never washed. But public bathhouses were actually common in many medieval towns. People bathed regularly, though the frequency and methods varied by class and region. The myth of dirtiness grew stronger during the later plagues, when bathing was wrongly thought to spread disease. The Iron Maiden is often shown as a gruesome medieval punishment tool, but there's no evidence it was ever actually used. Most examples were created in the 18th or 19th century for museums or shock value, not as real medieval artifacts. This bizarre image has roots in medieval folklore, but it wasn't a widely accepted belief during the Middle Ages. The flying broomstick idea became more prominent during later witch hunts, mixing superstition with fear and imagination. Knights are often portrayed as chivalrous and honourable, but in reality, many were brutal mercenaries or enforcers for powerful lords. While the code of chivalry existed, it was more of an ideal than a rulebook, and many knights ignored it when it suited them. While some monarchs claimed divine authority, the concept of the divine right of kings wasn't universal during the entire Middle Ages. Power often shifted between monarchs, nobles, and even religious leaders. In fact, many kings were challenged, deposed, or even excommunicated. Not all peasants were powerless. While serfdom was widespread, many peasants could own land, pay rent, and even sue lords in local courts. Life was hard, yes, but not entirely without rights or autonomy. It's a myth that medieval women had no voice. Queens like Eleanor of Aquitaine wielded enormous power, and women in some towns ran businesses, owned property, and led religious institutions. Their roles were more complex than most stereotypes suggest. Lastly, the idea of the Dark Ages is itself a myth. While it's true there were challenges, like war, disease, and limited scientific progress, this era also saw advancements in architecture, philosophy, literature, and early science. It laid the groundwork for the Renaissance. The medieval world was a place where justice was often brutal, unfair, and terrifying. From bizarre trials to horrifying executions, the punishments of the time reflected a society that believed suffering could reveal the truth. If someone was accused of a crime, they didn't get a fair trial. Instead, they faced trial by ordeal. This could mean holding a red-hot iron, walking across burning coals, or being thrown into a freezing river. If they survived or healed quickly, it meant God had judged them innocent. If not, their guilt was proven, and they were punished, often by execution. For lesser crimes, people were put in stocks or pillories, wooden frames that locked their heads and hands in place in the town square. There they were pelted with rotten food, mud, and even stones by angry crowds. This punishment wasn't just about suffering, it was meant to shame criminals so they wouldn't repeat their offences. Anyone suspected of witchcraft faced torture, forced confessions, and execution. Many were burned at the stake or hanged. Some trials used the ordeal by water, where the accused was thrown into a river. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank and drowned, they were innocent. Either way, survival was unlikely. Believe it or not, animals could be charged with crimes like destroying crops, attacking people, or even stealing. There are records of pigs being executed, goats being put on trial, and even insects being sentenced for damaging harvests. These trials were taken just as seriously as human cases. While peasants were punished for the smallest crimes, nobles often had private armies and could ignore the king's laws. They settled disputes with bribery, duels, or outright violence. If a noble did commit a crime, they were more likely to be banished or fined rather than executed. Poisoning was a serious fear, especially among the wealthy. To protect themselves, kings and nobles hired food testers, people who took the first bite of a meal to make sure it wasn't poisoned. If the tester survived, the food was considered safe. If not, well, it was time to find a new tester. Instead of going to court, people could fight to prove their innocence. Trial by combat was a legal way to settle accusations. Whoever won was considered right in the eyes of the law. Even minor disputes could be settled with swords, and sometimes the fight was to the death. Stealing wasn't taken lightly in the medieval world. Even petty theft, like stealing a loaf of bread, could lead to a harsh punishment, including hanging. The idea was that harsh penalties would scare people into obedience, but it often meant poor people faced death for minor crimes. Making fake coins was one of the worst crimes a person could commit. Since money was directly tied to the king's power, counterfeiting was seen as an act of treason. The punishment? Being thrown into a cauldron of boiling water or oil. Some trials were based entirely on pain and survival. In ordeal by fire, the accused had to carry a burning hot object. If their wounds healed, they were innocent. In ordeal by water, the accused was tied up and tossed into a river. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank, they were innocent, but often drowned. Grab your sword, strap on your armour, and let's ride into battle. Think castles were just grand stone homes. Think again. Defending a castle was brutal, and one of the sneakiest defences was murder holes. These were gaps in the ceiling where defenders could dump boiling oil, molten lead, or even rocks on invaders trying to storm the gates. If you ever wanted to take a swim in a medieval moat, don't. Most castle toilets, called garderobes, were simple stone seats with holes, leading directly into the moat. Yep, the same water that protected the castle from enemies was also filled with human waste. So if you were a soldier sieging a castle, not only were you dodging arrows, but you were also standing next to a giant medieval toilet. Becoming a knight wasn't just about wearing cool armour and swinging swords. It took a lifetime of training. Boys as young as 7 years old became pages, working under knights and learning basic combat skills. By 14, they became squires, training harder, polishing armour, and assisting in real battles. If they survived all that, they were knighted around age 21. No participation trophies here. If you couldn't keep up, you were out. Ever heard the myth that knights in full armour couldn't move? That's completely false. A full suit of plate armour weighed 80 to 100 pounds, but it was so well designed that knights could run, climb, and even do somersaults in it. Some knights even wrestled and fought on foot in full armour, proving that they weren't just walking tin cans. Jousting wasn't just a sport, it was a death match on horseback. Two knights charged at full speed, aiming their lances to shatter on impact. Even though they used blunt lances, knights often died from broken necks, concussions, or even splinters piercing their eyes. In one famous case, King Henry II of France was killed in a joust when a lance splintered through his eye socket. Talk about a painful way to go. The longbow was one of the deadliest weapons of the Middle Ages. Unlike short bows, these could pierce knight armour from over 200 yards away. At the Battle of Agincourt, 1415, English longbowmen decimated the French knights, proving that you didn't need heavy armour to win battles. You just needed a really, really big bow. Castles were built for defence, but if things got too dangerous, lords had hidden tunnels to escape a siege. These tunnels, called sally ports, led to secret exits beyond the castle walls, allowing defenders to sneak out, surprise the enemy, or even escape unnoticed. So if you ever feel trapped, just remember, medieval lords had a backup plan. Not all knights served kings, some joined mysterious warrior orders. The Knights Templar, Teutonic Knights, and Hospitallers were elite warriors sworn to protect pilgrims and fight in holy wars. Many of these knights became legendary, with some believing they guarded sacred relics like the Holy Grail. Their secrets remain shrouded in mystery, with some even inspiring legends of hidden treasure. Forget soccer or basketball. If you were a noble in medieval times, your favourite sport was hunting with falcons. Falconry was a status symbol, with trained birds hunting rabbits, pheasants, and even small deer. Only the wealthiest nobles could afford rare falcons from the Middle East, making them a prized possession in medieval courts. Think of it as having a luxury sports car, except it's a bird. Dogs and horses were common nightly pets, but some took it to the next level. They kept bears as pets. Knights returning from wars sometimes brought back exotic animals. Some even trained bears for hunting, or had them fight in tournaments for entertainment. Imagine riding into battle with a trained war bear. Now that's medieval madness. Most people in medieval times never travelled more than 10 miles from their birthplace. That's like spending your entire life in your hometown without ever leaving. Roads were dangerous, and most peasants were bound to the land, working for their lords from sunrise to sunset. Think your apartment needs a deep clean? Medieval homes had dirt floors, no glass windows, and were filled with the lovely aroma of smoke, sweat, and, well, livestock. Hygiene? That was a luxury few could afford. Toilets, forget about them. Most people simply had a hole in the ground or used chamber pots, which were dumped, sometimes out the window, onto the streets. Yep, medieval streets were not a place you'd want to take a casual stroll. Forget fancy silverware. Forks weren't commonly used in medieval Europe. People ate with their hands, knives, and sometimes spoons. If you dined with royalty, you might get a napkin. Otherwise, it was all about licking your fingers clean. Believe it or not, women were the primary brewers of beer. Since water was often unsafe to drink, beer was the go-to beverage for all ages. Brewing beer was a household task, just like cooking or baking bread. The medieval work week? 6 days a week, sunrise to sunset. Peasants worked long hours farming, tending livestock, and doing whatever their lord required. Sundays were a day of rest, and a much-needed break. Marriage in the Middle Ages happened early, sometimes as young as 12 for girls. Marriages were often arranged for economic or political reasons, not love. Romance novels had nothing on medieval reality. Think you can wear whatever you want, not in medieval times. Sumptuary laws dictated what colours and fabrics you could wear based on your social class. Peasants, earth tones, nobles, rich, vibrant hues. Medieval fairs were the highlight of the year. Think of them as a mix of a sports event, a music festival, and a wild party. Jousting, drinking, bear baiting, and live entertainment kept the crowds entertained. While peasants lived on bread and porridge, nobles feasted on extravagant dishes, swan, peacock, and even whale. Presentation was everything. Sometimes chefs would reassemble cooked birds with their feathers just for show. Medicine in the Middle Ages was questionable at best. If you were sick, your chances of survival depended more on luck than actual science. Let's take a look at some of the wildest medical practices and superstitions of medieval times. Feeling sick? Just drain some blood. Bloodletting was one of the most common treatments for everything. Fevers, headaches, infections, you name it. The idea was that illnesses were caused by an imbalance of bodily fluids, so removing blood would rebalance the body. Problem was, it often made people weaker or even killed them. Believe it or not, medieval doctors tasted urine to diagnose illnesses. They believed the colour, smell and taste revealed a patient's condition. Imagine walking into a doctor's office today and being handed a cup of pee for a taste test. Yeah, hard pass. The Black Death was the deadliest pandemic in history, wiping out nearly 50% of Europe's population in just a few years. But what caused it? Some believed it was bad air, others blamed angry gods or even witchcraft. People carried flowers or burned herbs to purify the air, none of which helped, of course. These guys, they weren't just creepy, they believed their beaked masks, stuffed with herbs, would protect them from the deadly disease. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Ever had a headache so bad you'd drill a hole in your head? Well, medieval doctors did just that. This practice, called trepanning, was meant to release evil spirits causing mental illness, seizures, or migraines, and somehow, people survived this. Before modern medicine, many treatments were a mix of herbs, magic spells, and crushed gemstones. Yup, some believed powdered gems could cure disease, while others relied on charms and prayers to heal. Let's just say medical school wasn't really a thing back then. Forget modern hospitals. Medieval ones were more like shelters run by monks. They provided food and a place to rest. But actual medical care? Not so much. If you got better, great. If not, well, prayers were your best hope. Believe it or not, people thought that kings had healing powers. It was called the king's touch, and rulers were believed to cure diseases like scrofula just by laying their hands on the sick. Did it work? Probably not. But hey, it gave people hope. Of all the bizarre treatments, leeches are still used today. In medieval times, they were placed on wounds to suck out bad blood and prevent infection. Turns out modern doctors actually use leeches in surgery to improve circulation, one of the few medieval treatments that wasn't complete nonsense. Giving birth in medieval times was dangerous, so midwives relied on prayers, amulets, and herbal remedies to protect mothers and babies. Superstition and medicine often went hand in hand, because back then, any bit of luck was needed to survive.